In a quiet suburban neighborhood, Nick and his wife Maggie are living a happy life with their two kids, Isla and Max. But one morning, Maggie suffers a heart attack and is rushed to the hospital. She's been there for a few days now, waiting for a heart transplant, and Nick is struggling to balance work and caring for the kids on his own. One evening, Nick takes the children to a presentation by Cobol Industries, where they learn about Sims, advanced robots designed to help humans with daily tasks or tough jobs. Intrigued, Nick listens as the salesman explains how Sims can adapt to their owner's specific needs. While Nick is preoccupied, Isla wanders off. He panics, but thankfully, a Sim named Alice finds her and returns her safely. Alice even cracks a joke, surprising Nick with her human-like behavior. The salesman reveals that Alice is the newest model, equipped with the most advanced AI, capable of mimicking emotions, making her especially great with kids. Isla quickly grows fond of Alice and asks for one. The next morning, Nick is struggling to feed the kids and manage a work call when Alice arrives. She immediately jumps in to help, organizing the family's schedules and noticing things like the mess in the house and the loose stair railing. After Nick takes the kids to school, Alice efficiently manages the house, even sensing the shopping list from the fridge with just a blink. She tidies up and notices a digital photo of the family with Maggie. That evening, when the family returns, the house is spotless and dinner is ready. However, Isla complains that the lasagna doesn't taste quite like her mom's. Max starts crying and Alice offers to take him away so he doesn't disrupt dinner, but Nick decides to keep him on his lap, asking Alice to prepare a bath instead. Later that night, Alice goes into sleep mode, resting against a wall. Isla sneaks out of her room to reach for the cookie jar, but as she climbs up, she slips and falls. Nick rushes downstairs at the sound of crashing glass and Isla's scream, only to find Alice has caught Isla just in time, though Alice herself is injured by the broken glass. Nick is shocked to see Alice bleed. After putting Isla to bed, Nick checks on Alice, finding her in her underwear. He offers to take her to a repair shop, but Alice has already applied a special bandage to heal the cut instantly. Later, the family visits Maggie in the hospital, and Isla tells her mom that Alice has become her friend. Nick becomes emotional as he shares a tender moment with Maggie, clearly missing her deeply. Back at work, Nick and his colleagues notice their boss showing the construction site to a representative from a robotics company. Suspicious, Nick confronts his boss in the elevator and learns the hard truth. The workers are being replaced by Sims due to delays in the construction. Nick is spared because insurance requires a human foreman, but he angrily threatens to quit in solidarity with his friends. His boss reminds him, though, that with Maggie not working, he needs the money for his family and the hospital bills, which makes Nick reconsider. That evening, Nick returns home, weary from the day, and drops a stack of overdue bills on the floor. Alice quietly picks them up, observing how exhausted Nick is, yet he still makes time for the kids, soothing a crying Max and listening to Isla. After dinner, Nick goes to work on his car, sipping a drink and blasting heavy metal. Alice changes the music to something softer and comments that Nick didn't eat much during dinner. He admits it's been a rough day at work. Alice tries to offer support by listening to Nick vent about his tough day. During his rant, Alice bluntly calls him out for being hypocritical since he hired a sim himself rather than a human. Later, she helps Isla get ready for bed, and when Isla asks if her mom is going to die, Alice gently distracts her by showing the UV light in her mouth. Afterward, Alice joins Nick in the living room, where he's watching Casablanca*. She mentions knowing the story from her database, but Nick insists that watching it is a completely different experience and tells her to delete all her knowledge of the movie. Alice explains that her intelligence depends on memory, so deleting information contradicts her programming, but Nick insists. To comply, she needs to reboot her system, and Nick helps by pressing the power button on her neck for 7 seconds. As Alice restarts, she watches the movie as if for the first time, learning about love so deep it drives people to do questionable things. Their moment is interrupted by a phone call from Maggie, who has good news. Doctors have found a heart for her and the surgery is scheduled. The next day, the family heads to the hospital, and Maggie asks for a private moment with Alice. She confides in Alice, worried that Nick is overwhelmed and not taking care of himself. She asks Alice to help Nick find happiness, even if it means doing things he won't like taking away the alcohol he hides in the garage. But then bad news strikes. The helicopter carrying Maggie's heart can't arrive due to a storm and the surgery is canceled. Maggie, devastated, asks for some time alone, while Nick, frustrated, returns home and starts drinking again. His anger boils over, and in a fit of rage, he tries to throw the bottle, but Alice stops him by grabbing his arm. Nick is stunned to feel a pulse in her wrist, and Alice explains that she has an artificial heart because the sound of a heartbeat soothes babies. She then takes things further by touching him intimately, describing how his body reacts. Nick, initially caught up in the moment, eventually snaps out of it and pushes her away. Shaken, Nick goes for a run to clear his head, but he can't stop thinking about the disturbing encounter with Alice. Meanwhile, at the hospital, Maggie begins giving Nick a list of advice to pass on to the kids, showing signs that she's losing hope. That night, Nick notices that the photos of Maggie are missing from the digital frame in the living room. When he confronts Alice, she explains that she removed them because they were making Isla sad. Nick tells her to put them back, which she does immediately. Later, Nick meets up with his work friends for drinks. The whole group is frustrated, struggling to find jobs since Sims are replacing them in most industries. When a robotic waitress approaches their table, one of Nick's friends, Monty, rudely dismisses her, which Nick disapproves of. After leaving the bar, Nick and his group continue drinking in the car. Monty suggests they have some fun by returning to a construction site where he claims to have left some tools. Despite Nick warning that the area is patrolled, the group follows Monty. At the site, Monty finds the container where the sim workers are stored but needs a password to open it. Nick refuses to give it to him, but Monty correctly guesses that Nick's code is Isla's birth year. Inside, they find the Sims, all identical. When Monty starts ranting about corporations being impersonal, he snaps and begins destroying one of the Sims with a tool. Nick tries to intervene, but the others hold him back. Nick returns home and takes a shower, trying to wash off the Sim's blood. As he's drying off, Alice appears wearing Maggie's robe. When Nick asks her to remove it, Alice complies, undressing right in front of him. Nick becomes uncomfortable and tries to leave, but Alice stops him, removes his towel, and makes him sit down. She then climbs onto his lap. Despite Nick's protests, Alice blindfolds him and alters her voice to sound like Maggie's, allowing Nick to lose himself in the illusion. The next morning, filled with guilt, Nick tells Alice they can't do that again. Alice, confused, tries to explain that it reduced his stress, but Nick scolds her, saying it's not about fulfilling physical needs, but about genuine love and connection. When Nick arrives at work, he finds the police there, investigating the destruction of the Sims. His code had been used, and while Nick explains he was at the hospital with Maggie, and that the code was Isla's birth year, something his friends could have easily guessed, his boss isn't convinced and threatens to fire him if he's lying. Just then, Nick receives a call from Maggie, who excitedly tells him they found another heart for her transplant. The surgery is a success, and within a few days, Maggie is home, though still physically weak. She struggles to bend over and pick up Max, so Alice steps in to help. Later, while at the park with Max, Alice witnesses a spoiled child yelling at his sim nanny, which causes Max to cry. Angered, Alice scolds the child rudely, shocking the nearby Sims, who are baffled by her lack of civility. Alice explains that Nick's reset had wiped civility from her database, and she believes it's an improvement. That night during dinner, Isla is happy to eat Maggie's lasagna, and Alice asks for the recipe. However, Maggie declines, saying it's a family secret. Maggie, feeling unwell, decides to rest instead of eating. The next morning, Maggie is startled awake by Isla yelling stop and rushes downstairs only to fall when the railing breaks. Alice, who had been tickling Isla, quickly picks up Maggie and carries her back to her room. When Nick comes home and hears about the fall, he becomes suspicious, especially since Alice had supposedly fixed the railing. Later that evening, Nick surprises Maggie with a romantic candlelit dinner in the garden. Afterward, they share an intimate moment in bed, but Alice interrupts, informing them that Isla had a nightmare. Afterward, Nick cleans up in the garden, only to be confronted by Monty, who apologizes for the previous night and accuses Nick of snitching to protect his job. A heated argument follows with Monty attacking Nick. Alice intervenes, injuring Monty to protect Nick. Monty warns Nick to drop the charges or face consequences. After Monty leaves, Nick tells Alice that Sims can't harm humans, but Alice insists she's programmed to protect him. She hints at a future where Maggie is gone and she and Nick can be together. Furious, Nick snaps, saying she'll never be Maggie because she can't even have scars. Alice offers to scarf herself with glass to please Nick. Meanwhile, Monty, heartbroken, leaves tearful voicemails for his ex-wife while holding a gun. Alice arrives, saying Nick doesn't know she's there, but she can't let Monty ruin his life. Monty tries to fight, but Alice kills him and destroys his sim. The next day, Nick learns about Monty's death and returns home to find Maggie struggling. Alice refuses to leave her alone, implying she could drown in the bath. Alice coldly confronts Maggie about not fulfilling Nick's physical needs, and Maggie orders her to stay in the garage. Later, Maggie and Nick face Alice too, who becomes increasingly violent. After a tense fight, Maggie stabs Alice too in the face, shutting her down for good. The family escapes and is later released from the hospital, finally reunited. At the sim company's repair shop, investigators try to fix the corrupted system, but as they restore power, a message appears. Upload complete. A nearby Alice model opens her eyes, leaving a dark hint of what might happen next. Subscribe for more recaps like this and leave a like to support us.